Today on NewsWatch, world leaders gather in Paris for a summit on climate change, but the topic of terrorism is overshadowing the event. Plus, new details about the motivation behind the Colorado Planned Parenthood shooting. We'll bring you the latest on that tragedy. And they were taken captive by ISIS and live to tell about it. Today we're hearing from Yazidi refugees who fled the Islamic terror group. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Caitlin Burke. High-level climate talks have begun in Paris with the hope of saving the planet from man-made climate change. And President Obama is there pushing for a deal that would bypass Congress. Dale Hurd explains.
151 world leaders have converged on Paris to launch 2 weeks of talks aimed at an ambitious agreement to curb carbon dioxide emissions. Leaders like the UN General Secretary think we are on the precipice of global catastrophe.
The time is now to act. We don't have any time to waste.
President Obama is there, and the White House wants a deal that doesn't have to be approved by Congress.
The design of the Paris negotiation is really driven in large part by the desire to get an agreement that does not have to go through the treaty ratification process. It's all perfectly legal.
The planet's warming. 99% of scientists have said it's warming.
Actually, the claim was 97% of scientists, and that has been shown to be wrong in peer-reviewed journals. But the president obviously needs to gin up public support because any agreement in Paris is going to be dead on arrival in the Senate.
My message is very clear to them right now that we're not going to adopt anything over here that is mandatory.
If there is an agreement and the president does choose yet again to bypass Congress, that's not exactly going to facilitate warm relations between Congress and the White House.
On Fox News Sunday, Republican presidential candidate Carly Fiorina blasted President Obama for continuing to say that climate change was the most important security threat facing the United States.
Well, that's delusional. It is delusional for President Obama and Hillary Clinton and anyone else to say that climate change is our near-term most severe security threat. It is ISIS, period.
A Fox News poll showed that only 3% of Americans agreed with the president that climate change is the most important issue. Public concern about climate change is dropping in most Western nations, but world leaders are spending a lot of money and emitting a lot of carbon to hold a conference on an issue that fewer and fewer Europeans and Americans care about. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Police are trying to figure out why a gunman killed 3 people at a Colorado Planned Parenthood clinic Friday. Today, the man accused of the shootings makes his first appearance in court, and more information out about the victims as families process their loss. An Iraq war veteran, a mother of 2, and a police officer, all victims of a 5-hour siege at the Colorado Springs Planned Parenthood clinic.
We're pinned down. We're getting active gunfire.
While investigators continue to process the scene of the deadly shooting, families and friends of the victims grieve, remembering their loved ones. 35-year-old Jennifer Markovsky was a married mother of 2, accompanying a friend to the clinic. The second civilian killed, 29-year-old Kiara Stewart, served in the Army's 4th Infantry Division. And the third victim was Officer Garrett Swasey. He worked as a police officer at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and was called to assist with the active shooter at the clinic. Swasey was also the co-pastor at his church, Hope Chapel.
He would have gone into that clinic, to serve those people because their lives matter.
The shooter, Robert Louis Deere, is in custody. Authorities say he made remarks about baby parts to investigators after his surrender. Over the weekend, several presidential hopefuls spoke out about the attack. Democrats Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders tweeting the hashtag #WeStandWithPP, and several GOP candidates addressed the attack on the Sunday shows.
What he did is domestic terrorism, and what he did is absolutely abominable.
Any hate crime is a horrible thing, no matter from where it comes, and should be condemned very strongly.
Meanwhile, the community of Colorado Springs is pulling together. Candlelight vigils being held over the weekend to remember those killed and injured in the attacks. Republican presidential candidate Marco Rubio says the fight over same-sex marriage isn't over. CBN's David Brody caught up with Rubio at an event in Iowa where pastors prayed for Rubio. In an exclusive interview, Rubio told Brody the Supreme Court's ruling on marriage makes it the current law, but that doesn't mean it's final.
It is not settled law. No law is settled. Roe v. Wade is current law, but it doesn't mean that we don't continue to aspire to fix it because we think it's wrong. I think the broader question is, what is our role in terms of confronting it? And again, if you look at biblical lessons, the first thing is we are clearly called in the Bible to adhere to our civil authorities. But that conflicts with also a requirement to adhere to God's rules. Right. And so when those two come in conflict, God's rules always win. In essence, if we are ever ordered by a government authority to personally violate and sin, violate God's law and sin, if we're ordered to stop preaching the gospel, if we're ordered to perform a same-sex marriage as someone presiding over it, we are called to ignore that. We cannot abide by that because government is compelling us to sin.
We'll have more on Rubio's meeting with Iowa pastors on CBNNews.com on Wednesday. Plus, you can watch clips on David Brody's blog, The Brody Files, starting today. Republican candidate Ben Carson says Syrian refugees don't want to come to the U.S.
Go back home. For us to bring 10,000 or 25,000 people over here, that doesn't solve the problem.
Those were Carson's statements as he wrapped up his visit to refugee camps in Jordan. The visit is Carson's first overseas trip as a presidential candidate. Carson has taken heat for his grasp of foreign policy. He says he went to Jordan so he can know what he's talking about. The Paris terror attacks ignited a worldwide debate over Syrian refugees stretching from Europe to America, where some governors are trying to block them from entering their states. CBN's Operation Blessing is on the ground in the war-torn country and brought us a voice missing from this debate. As Ephraim Graham reports, it's the voice of those fleeing for their lives.
Refugees are front-page news, and the headlines only increased. Following reports, authorities found a Syrian passport near an assailant killed in the deadly Paris attacks.
You know, we're hearing stories about ISIS infiltration and all that, and I think that's good that we're aware of these possible problems.
Operation Blessing President Bill Horan recently witnessed the refugee crisis firsthand. He stood at the border of Hungary and Croatia, where thousands arrived, having crossed 9 borders to reach that point.
You have been on the front lines now. What are we not hearing? What are we not seeing?
We're certainly only seeing one side of the story. And the side of the story that I keep noticing that's being left out is the story from the perception of the refugees. The vast majority of these folks, at least the ones that we've interacted with, that we met, that we talked to while we were over there, they're not terrorists at all.
These are some of the faces. Photographs taken by Operation Blessing's David Darg, who spent time talking to those whose images he captured.
They said we had 3 choices. We could either be conscripted into the Assad regime and fight for Assad, or we have to fight for ISIS, forced to fight for ISIS, or we can just stay here and be killed. So when we see these attacks happening in Paris and all this terror happening around the world, we need to understand that's the very terror that these people are running from, not running towards.
There are many young men among those running, and it's no accident. That's a blessing Bill learned talking to a 27-year-old Syrian Christian whose family pooled their money to send him.
He said, I went to the meeting. I did not volunteer to leave my home and come to Germany. I was chosen by the family as the one most likely to make it across 9 borders, across a 17-hour ride in a rubber boat from Turkey to Greece. He said, I was seasick for 17 hours and I was sure I was going to die. He said, we were all praying out loud, praying to the Lord just to get us to the other side. He said, many people drowned on the way.
So it's essentially desperation is where they're leaving, they're fleeing.
They're leaving out of desperation, of course.
Still, not everyone is able to flee. That's why Operation Blessing isn't just stopping at the border.
We're actually working inside Syria. We've got partners that are inside Syria, in the northeastern part of Syria, the area that is still safe from ISIS, at least now, because the Kurds are defending that area. There are Syrians that are there, Christian Syrians that speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Coming up, the plight of the Yazidi people sold as sex slaves or forced into jihad. We go inside a UN refugee camp for their chilling stories after this. She was a 19-year-old and sold as a sex slave for $800. He was a 14-year-old boy forced into training to be a jihadist. Both were teenage prisoners of ISIS, and both of them escaped. Recently, they told their horrific stories to Chris Mitchell at a Yazidi refugee camp inside Kurdistan.
In just one day, thousands of Yazidis went from living in their ancient homeland to a UN refugee camp like this one. After ISIS captured Sinjar, the main city of the Yazidis, most of them live now in camps like this. Nearly 20,000 live in this one alone. But a few here have made the harrowing escape out of the hands of ISIS.
So when they were selling us girls, the buyer would come in to take his slave. If any of us refused, they would beat us very badly. No one went with the buyers willingly.
ISIS captured this 19-year-old girl who we named Nazda to protect her identity. She spent 10 months as a sex slave after ISIS sold her to an Arab man for the equivalent of $800 US.
The man was really bad. He treated me like an animal. He had 4 wives and they had no sympathy for me. I was beaten and treated very badly.
ISIS tried to convert Nazda to Islam and dealt harshly with anyone trying to help women like Nazda.
They brought 3 men into the ISIS court. They were accused of helping the women who had become Yazidi sex slaves. They killed them, beheaded them in front of us. They showed us that this is the fate of anybody trying to help you.
ISIS also captured hundreds of young boys, including 14-year-old Mamo.
They insulted us and told us we were unclean. They accused us of being blasphemers, unbelievers who didn't believe in Islam or Allah. They taught us the Quran and also trained us how to use heavy weapons. Later, they told us we should be jihadists just like them and convert to Islam.
After months of this indoctrination, Mamo miraculously escaped by convincing his captors he was ill. They put him with his mother, which gave them the opportunity to flee. These are pictures of what Mamo escaped. Here you have 32 young Yazidi boys posing with an Islamic State flag, and here they've already graduated. These are meant to be the jihadis of the next generation of the Islamic State. Their goal was clear:
to convert us, then to make us into jihadi, and then kill our own people, the Yazidis.
He also explained what ISIS told them their ultimate goals were.
They said we will not leave any place, even a small part of the world, without Islam.
Nazda heard the same goal.
They told me they are not a state of Mosul or Raqqa or anywhere. They said it's not a small state. Islamic State is a big state and can cover the whole world.
While Mamo escaped ISIS, many Yazidis like Nazda have been rescued through the efforts of men like Abdullah. He acts as a go-between for captured Yazidis by negotiating with their captors.
Before ISIS took over Sinjar, I used to buy and sell things inside Syria. Now, with my relationship with the people in Syria, I use that relationship to rescue people.
So far, Abdullah has rescued at least 138 Yazidis. I asked him the cost to rescue 1 or 2.
It depends. Sometimes we bring them for free without any money, sometimes for just $1,000, sometimes $5,000. It's different.
This is a screenshot that Abdullah showed me from a captured ISIS cell phone. It shows Twitter accounts where ISIS members can communicate between each other to buy and sell sex slaves. The Kurdish government set up this office to help rescue the nearly 6,000 captured Yazidis. So far, Hadi Dabani and his team have helped more than 2,000. They hear horrific stories.
Describing their situation is very hard, because some of the girls have told us they have had their hands tied for 3 months, have been harassed and forced to have sex. Imagine having sex with the mother in front of her son and then killing the son.
The plight of one 13-year-old brought Dubani to tears.
I tried very hard to rescue her. She's been married 5 times. She has also been imprisoned.
Success stories like Nazda make their efforts worthwhile, and Dubani pleads for more help.
Is it acceptable that the international community or the UN, who know that nearly 6,000 people have been kidnapped by ISIS and have experienced persecution, harassments, and treated like animals, keep silent? They don't make any steps to help.
The Kurdish offensive that retook Sinjar might alleviate some of their suffering. Until then, many Yazidis, like these small children, remain in refugee camps, and other Yazidis continue to languish in the clutches of ISIS. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Konklay Refugee Camp, Kurdistan.
Up next, most people know Winston Churchill as one of Britain's greatest prime ministers. But what they may not know is that he was also a dedicated Christian. Find out more after this. Today is Winston Churchill's birthday. It's now been 50 years since the death of this great world leader who rallied the free world to defeat Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime. He provided inspiration and resolve in the face of despair. But did he believe in God? A new book by one of Winston Churchill's great-grandsons answers that question, and as Heather Sells report, he had a strong personal faith.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed.
Historians consider him one of the greatest leaders of the millennium. But until now, the world has known little of Winston Churchill's personal belief in God. Most experts have considered him to be agnostic, but great-grandson Jonathan Sands says Churchill moved on from the agnostic days of his youth.
I definitely conclude, as Wallace does, that my great-grandfather had a strong faith. In those days, you didn't talk about your faith. You know, Churchill wasn't a religious figure, he was a prime minister.
He believed that Jesus was a historic figure, that Jesus was the savior of the world. He believed those things. He believed in the Bible as an authentic, literal book that was inspired of God. He believed those things.
In God and Churchill, the authors cite a conversation between the Prime Minister and his bodyguard, Walter Thompson. While on a walk one day, they narrowly escaped a bomb. Churchill then turned to Thompson and said, "Don't worry, there is someone else looking after me."
Walter Thompson misunderstood, and he said, "Do you mean Sergeant Davis?" Great-grandpapa gave a small smile. He shook his head and said no, and he pointed to the sky, and he said, "There is someone up there who has a mission for me to perform, and he intends to see that mission is performed."
Sands decided to write the book after speaking with Churchill's official biographer, who told him of unexplored material regarding his faith. That led to the discovery of multiple examples where Churchill privately referred to his personal belief. One day, while discussing world leaders throughout history with Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Churchill spoke frankly about Jesus Christ.
"What do you think about Jesus Christ?" Montgomery asks Churchill. And Churchill says, "Jesus Christ was unsurpassed in his capacity to save sinners." Those were his words. We quote them in the book.
Henley and Sands credit Churchill's nanny with teaching him the gospel.
His nanny, Elizabeth Everest, had pumped the Word of God into him. And he analyzed things from that perspective.
Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization.
Churchill's Christian worldview allowed him to clearly recognize Nazism as the pit of evil, even when others did not. He openly acknowledged that only God could see Britain through the war and encouraged the British to put their hope in him.
As the will of God is in heaven, even so let him do.
Unlike Adolf Hitler, great-grandpapa directed the hope of the people towards God. Whenever he used God or used a Bible quote within a speech, it was always to push the people's hope towards God.
Churchill also modeled Christian virtues like forgiveness. He appointed some of his critics to his wartime cabinet and refused to vilify the Germans.
When you look at his speeches, you see when he's talking about the Nazis, he separates the Nazis from the German people. He wanted freedom for the people of Germany. And it was vital that we didn't repeat what happened at the end of the First World War, where Germany was just totally pushed aside and nobody wanted.
Sands and Henley point out that Churchill led from a core belief in divine destiny. As a 16-year-old schoolboy, he prophesied to a friend that London would one day be attacked and that he would lead England to victory.
To then state clearly and with confidence that not only are you going to be the leader at a time of war, but you're going to lead your country and your empire to victory, that becomes absolutely impossible. But in the light of history in 1945, you see that that's actually the case.
Sands and Henley say it's almost unbelievable how many times Churchill escaped death during his time in the Boer War and later in World War I. As a member of Parliament in the 1930s, his public reputation sank as he warned of Hitler and the Nazis and spoke out against appeasement. In the end, Hitler's advance through Europe vindicated Churchill and silenced his critics, perfectly preparing him to become prime minister.
When I warned them that Britain would fight on alone,
God himself was intervening through this man in that period of history. So God will intervene in our history. He will raise up people like that.
Sands and Henley say such a belief can provide hope today, when once again, the world is in need of a strong leader to stand up against the forces of darkness. Heather Sells, CBN News.
CBN's Orphans Promise is celebrating 10 years of loving children who were once neglected and taking them on a path to a bright future. In Africa alone, more than 3,500 children receive a quality education each month through Orphans Promise education programs. In Kenya, one student is now attending medical school, another is attending nursing school, and 10 more have been accepted to university. In all, Orphans Promise is serving more than 100,000 children each year in nearly 60 countries around the world. That's it for now on CBN NewsWatch. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.